The idea of launching a church is probably one of the craziest things that a person could ever want to do. But several years ago, being youth pastors, my wife and I began to see a group of kids that were involved in youth ministries, dynamic, energetic worship. And as soon as they turned an older age, they had to move out of the youth. We began to watch these youth fall out of church because it wasn't the same. This began to really become part of our heart, is to see this generation come back into a service where they could experience God in this way of high intense worship and praise and sermons that would connect to this generation, that this would bring these kids back to the church and they could experience God again. In September of 2006, my wife and I began to really sense that this was something that God was leading us into, of launching a place, a culture where people could experience God and His love, and then not only just experience God and His love, but that they would find a place where they could discover their purpose and discover a life of fulfillment. We began to think about, what we would name it, and my wife we began to throw kind of names out, and she just kind of one day said, I really feel like that this is something extreme for us. It's extreme for the community. And so she said, let's call it Extreme Church. Basically, we were starting with my wife and me and our two kids, Bo and Kimberlyn. That's kind of who, that was the individuals that was going to launch the church. We began to tithe to Extreme Church, which did not even exist yet. But we began to tithe, and we just began to put everything that we had into this idea of Extreme Church. Every person that we knew was already serving in church somewhere, and the last thing we wanted to do was go into another church and pull someone out just to serve in our church. And so we began to really think and pray about individuals, and I remembered one person, and so I called Kyle Dooley.
So Pastor Ronnie contacted me out of the blue and knew some of my family members and knew I had played guitar.
And I just asked him, would you be willing to come on board with us and be one of our musicians?
Told him I wasn't for sure how long I could commit, but I had felt like God had given me a little bit of talent, and that if I was going to play guitar, I was going to play it for God. And here I am 10 years later, and a lot has changed. Met my wife there, got 3 kids, so yeah, be careful what you get into at church. So God will bless you immensely.
So on August the 19th, 2007, we planned our first meeting. That first meeting took place at the Comfort Inn, which is now the Quality Inn. I still remember looking out that window wondering if anybody would ever show up. But it wasn't just a few minutes when, right before it was time to actually start, we saw some cars pulling up and people started getting out. And I stood and I poured my heart out to that group. And I remember Dan Volk spoke up, and Dan's kind of a quiet person anyway, but he spoke up and he basically said it like this. He said, let's do it. At that moment, someone spoke up and said, well, if we're going to do this, we need to take up an offering. And so one of the guys took their hat off and just went around the room. I was blown away by the enthusiasm of those in that room. Then we were just trying to determine, well, where are we going to have this? We can't, we don't really want to have it here at the hotel. And so someone spoke up and recommended that we look into the Prior Youth Organization building, the PYO building. And on that next Monday, I called the city and we set up, and they were going to let us go in that building and have our first service, which would be the next Sunday. We turned the key to that door and walked in, and I have never smelled a more musty smell than what that building smelled like. It was dark. It was like a dungeon. That weekend, that Saturday night, we began to set chairs.
And I just remember in the early stages, there's only so many people to help.
It was just a time to remember of all of this that we went through just to set this place where people could experience God and have a life change.
In the beginning, when church started, you never knew how many people were going to be here. You always hoped that there would be a good crowd, but sometimes when service first started, it was a little scary looking out across the crowd.
We wanted to move somewhere where it was a little bit more convenient, so we had spoke with the city about another building, which was their community building.
I can remember in the beginning when we had church at the PYO, there wasn't any place to pray except for that little hallway going outside. And a lot of times it was flooded, it had water in it. And then when we moved to the community building, the only place that we had to go to pray was a broom closet.
About 6 o'clock in the morning, we began to set all the chairs and cover all the windows.
And it was fun for us, even though, getting up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, being there
and bring our instruments in. It didn't matter if it was sleeting, snowing, raining. We would back a trailer up that we kept all of our equipment in, and we would unload that every Sunday morning.
I can just remember everybody pitching in and helping, and nobody really considered it to be a job.
It was just a really great time of relationships and building our lives together. After about 2.5 years of being portable, we had the opportunity to move into a building. This building was like a blessing. After 2.5 years of setting up week after week after week, we finally get to go into a building and leave it set up.
Well, going from PYO to community building to here, this here was a load off everyone's shoulders. The congregation was helping set up, take down everything else there, and we didn't have to do that anymore. And from our humble beginnings as a furniture store to where we're at today is quite a progression.
And I know that some of our team was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing to not have to get up every Sunday morning and set up, and all we have to do is just come into the building. And God began to really do some amazing things in people's lives, changing people's lives forever.
And the number of people that have been saved and baptized, it just keeps going and going.
I don't know that there's words for what Ronnie and Missy did, but if a person ever needed to be commended, it would be those two. And the one thing about Pastor Ronnie and Pastor Missy is those people are genuine to what they do. They're genuine to the church. They're genuine with their walk, and they live the life. They walk the walk and talk the talk, and it's a genuine, and their relationship with God's genuine, and all I can say, look around at all this, and the rest of it speaks for itself.
Yeah, we've seen the Spirit move here so many times and so many healings. It's just amazing what has gone on and what continues to go on.
It's amazing to hear stories about how God has changed people from not even believing in God to fully devoted followers of Christ.
But that's the whole purpose of Extreme Church, is to touch people's lives, let them know who Jesus is, and show them the love of Christ.
Yeah, we believe that we exist to provide a place where people can experience God and His love and then find fulfillment and purpose in their life.